What did you guys think generally of the narrating character himself? His name was Antoine, and I don't remember his last name, but
These are all French names, so let's just
yeah.
we'll just do our best to kind of like avoid names
Oh,
specifically. You know,
true,
like,
true.
I can't pronounce
The
No,
narrator
in
works
any
for
of the
me.
road names.
I should
So-
say so we're talking about the first section of, generally speaking, the first third to first fourth in Giffin's part of
Sure.
Jean-Paul Sartre's Nausea. Adam and I have the translation by Lloyd Alexander, and Giffin, your translation is by
Robert Baldick. Jordan, you're certain that you didn't have a third version of that one available, correct?
I know nothing about Mr. Baldick's translation skills.
Brutal last name.
I'm sure
This
middle
guy's
school
lucky
was,
to be where he was in life.
I'm sure middle school was not an easy time for him.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
It took him on a path to nausea at the very least.
Oh boy.
Wow. So, to be honest, I had actually forgotten from time to time how recently this was written. Because Sartre
Say
lived
Sartre.
Sartre.
Say Sartre.
Well,
Is it two syllables?
I'm on fact. I looked up
In the
multiple pronunciations, and everybody said Sartre.
Okay,
in
that's
the
how I've always heard
French,
it.
apparently the French is like Sartre.
It's not. It's two.
Well, I think it's two
look up-
syllables. The French
okay.
just don't like emphasizing
Okay, Sartre.
syllables.
Sartre. We'll do
Yeah,
Sartre.
no,
for
I
this.
listened to multiple French pronunciations of it just to make sure on that one.
So this was actually originally published in 1938, which is kind of recent compared to
Wow.
obviously the Notes from Underground. And it also, I mean, a lot of the, it's funny, like a lot of the situations or scenes that he kind of, drolly talks about could really be anywhere from like the 1950s all the way back to like the 1850s. It all kind
Yeah.
of fits. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because he's writing in France also, which was a bit more of a kind of, romantic city even in the 1930s.
Well, romantic country maybe, but
Or-
the city he's in is not Paris.
Yes,
it's
yes.
like I think it's a fictionalized version of some real town, but it's not
sh-
like
Do they ever say? I
No,
thought
I
Bouville is
they-
the name of the town, or
Yeah,
Beauville, or
I
Beauville.
I think it's definitely fictionalized because, like, I looked up like that one. I forget the exact boulevard's name, but it's the one that ends in Noir. It might be
Okay.
like Victor Noir or something like that, which is like the boulevard that he, kind of finds solace in at least. And I've looked that one up, and it's definitely a fake road, right?
Okay.
So like, but it
Okay.
was based on like a real road.
Yes.
So which makes me think that lends credence to Giffin's idea that it's not a real town that he's kind of describing here.
Yeah,
So-
definitely.
Yeah, I think it's, well, at the time it was probably meant to be like, a typical French, town. So
Mhm.
like you could map onto that kind of, well, if you were familiar with it, at least. I'm not quite, but it doesn't need to be super specific with the locations.
What did you guys think of the main character in general?
Very interesting psychology. I definitely didn't find myself relating to him as much as I did with Dostoevsky's
Underground
Underground Man. Yeah.
I agree.
And I don't know. Also, I don't know if that's the intention. Also, like,
I was
That
that
might be
bothered by
revealed.
this guy.
yeah, because like with the Underground Man, you can kind of like read it and like see parts yourself and like kind of like laugh, but also like a little bit of a gut punch. And it all seems to like map onto something. For this, it's like this guy is like living in some sort of like self-propagated dystopia nearly. Like it definitely does not read the same. This is not like simply an underground man in the next century.
I will say this though, I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but kind of like immersing yourself in this book for a prolonged period of time, once you exit the book, I noticed that I begin to sort of like adopt some of the behavior of the character.
I actually agree.
You know what I mean? Where
really?
it's just like I do like that general like dissociation that he has, where it's a lot of observation and I think, you know,
Yeah.
a lot. I mean, we can kind of begin to incorporate just his psychology here, but my interpretation of this was that he views the world as happening to him, but he's not the one actually like making things happen. He's not the one, you know, he's not like the impetus for the narrative that he wishes his life to be.
Yes.
Right? Like things happen to him and he seems to be almost like a passive observer. But yeah, like whenever after like reading him for like, you know, or reading like Sartre for like a few hours, like you come out of it, I almost like adopt some of like the psychology of Antoine, at least for a time. You know what I mean? Like at least like I don't know, conversation felt weird. I don't know. I don't know if you guys felt the same.
I kind of read it. Well, first of all, I read less because of page number discrepancies. But also I kind of like was reading it in the evenings, just like a little bit at a time. So I didn't get into that like groove. So that's also interesting.
See, I read 70 pages this morning. So I emerged from that like in a very kind of dizzying state almost.
Yeah.
It was it was just extremely, I felt like, you know how like I felt almost like I had spun around with like a blindfold on and then it was removed. And I had to kind of like navigate an obstacle course in a lot of ways.
Well, it seems like I'll be doing some catching up, so I'll be able to cite some experience next time.
I'll echo your point though, Giffin, about I related to the Underground Man, and I don't know what this says about me specifically, but like I related to the Underground Man more so than I related to Antoine.
Yeah, like it was hyperbolic with the Underground Man, but like it was like easily identifiable aspects of yourself. With this, it was very hard. Like the version that I could relate to is almost indistinguishable from what he describes with himself. You know, like I can imagine sometimes where you're kind of like feeling like tired or something. Like that's like probably the most common version, you know, where he's like, you know, you might experience some dissociation, but he experiences like something wild. I don't know if we want to go through the narrative in order and go to examples, or
I kind of want to touch on some before we go into like the wildness of it. Why don't we touch on some things that like at least like resonated a bit with us?
Yeah.
Like I'll mention some things that like that resonated with me. Like for me, like when he talks about experiences that he's had abroad and how he has certain memories that he's replayed so many times that details begin to fade as a result, and that he touches upon certain memories less because every time the memories kind of like called upon, it becomes distorted.
You wear it out.
Wear it out.
The phrasing,
And I don't know if you guys have experienced that yourself, but like I've definitely experienced that tons of times where it's just like I've done this before. Where, like I pull upon memories less because I feel like the act of retelling the memory almost distorts it. Like, and like the point is like it's almost like I don't know, like where memories I've had seem clearest the first time of retelling, but the act of retelling has now muddled the memory. I don't know if you guys have had that too.
I completely agree. Like I'm thinking about, there were instances in college where like something crazy or really funny happened to me, right? And then like you would meet up with sort of different aspects of the friend group or whatever, and they'd be like, dude, we heard about this, like tell it or whatever. And the first couple times I would be telling the story, and I would also be kind of like witnessing the story myself as I told it. But like the more and more you tell it, you're almost like, I lost the ability to relive it, and it was just me repeating the story.
Yes.
Like I lost
just the
that.
words.
Yes. So I very much related to that too.
See, I wasn't sure because what my intuition would have been is that like, well, I guess two things. One is that like kind of over time, naturally, like the details get less fuzzy. Whereas like I wasn't sure if I related to like the actual aspect of telling it that actually like wears it out. You know what I mean? Like that seems like hard to distinguish, or at least it wasn't immediately distinguishable for me. But in terms of like whenever you're retelling it, it does seem like intuitive that you kind of like if you're adding something to it from the present, like to this like past memory, it makes sense that like in the future you might like be pulling towards like your memories of the telling, which would be like kind of more word oriented. I don't know. So I guess I think it's relatable, but not as much for me.
It's just like there was so many aspects to it, like where it was like, I don't know, like the idea that like when a memory like first hits me, it's like there are a lot of very clear aspects to the memory, but a lot of kind of like hazier aspects as well. But it's like one complete picture to the memory. But I feel like upon like the act of retelling it, I highlight the clear aspects of the memory. But then as a result, I've only retained the clear aspects. So it's like, it's almost like the periphery details that I myself, you know, it was like part of the larger memory. It's like those are now almost excised from the memory. I don't know.
By telling it.
By telling it.
Because that is interesting. The more you describe it, I think it makes a little bit more sense. I probably have experienced that. Well, Jordan,
you have to like think of like stories you've told and just like how now after telling the stories, like there are like the key plot points, but like I don't know.
I remember the change like over time, especially the experience, but it's like it's hard to isolate whether it was the retelling itself which did that versus like over time. That's something I'll have to probably be observant about like in the future, because honestly that's quite interesting.
Yeah.
But for me, Jordan, I don't know if you had another thing to say about the memory aspect.
Well, I was going to say, like, Giffin, your question makes total sense, but it's almost like impossible for me to answer because I don't know about you guys, but I actually find myself thinking about the past or thinking about memories when I'm by myself, like not telling them to someone very, very, very infrequently. Like I really, yes, I'm like extremely present and future oriented in like what I think about. To a like kind of weird degree, actually.
I am absorbed in memories.
I think I'm less so.
Yeah.
Alongside Jordan here.
You just don't have any to be absorbed in.
I do have them. I just never poke at them, which is kind of disturbing that I don't have like these pure memories because they've never been tainted by my retelling.
No, like I honestly like that part of the book like resonated so strongly with me to the point where like I've experienced this before where I will think fondly of certain memories, but then I've realized that they're like degrading, like as I pull upon them too frequently. And I'm just like, holy crap. So like when I read that, I'm like, holy crap, that's the exact same experience I've had when I've like drawn upon these same memories because like they're good memories, but yeah,
it's always good whenever you find an author who can put into words something you've experienced like that, just putting it on the page.
Let me clarify what I said a tiny bit. So I don't often I will not bring up memories mentally myself. I will oftentimes be reminded of things. Like I'll be in a certain place in the backyard or whatever and see just like some memory of us playing like the night tag game or whatever will just kind of like flash in my mind. And like that happens probably just as frequently as everyone. But if I'm actually just like in terms of what I'm consciously thinking about or, just what's going on in my mental space, it is, I think, to a weird degree present and future tense oriented.
This is actually shocking to me. So you don't parse through memories like on a daily basis?
No.
Because I will think of a few things and then I'll just kind of like sit down sometimes and just like think like sequentially what happened. And
see that I don't think I do very, very infrequently. Obviously, like Jordan said, like I will be reminded of things, but I don't think I will go and sit down and kind of just parse through it.
And I will often think about things from the past, but not in a
future or present
oriented.
Yeah.
Yes, not in a memory oriented sense, if that makes any sense.
Okay. Yeah. No, this is completely different for me then. I think that's why this section resonated so much with me, because I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it's oftentimes it almost feels like sand between your fingers.
Yes. The retelling of a story, I totally agree with you there.
Yeah. I agree with there.
Yeah.
For my me going through that part for the first time, it was kind of like, interesting. I wonder if that's actually like his experience or if it's just the fact that time passes, and then that was like all I kind of put thought into it.
obviously I don't know where the story goes, so this thought could change, but part of my slight antipathy towards Antoine, as opposed to my sort of begrudging like sympathy for the underground man,
Yeah.
was that they both people deal with sort of inaction in various ways, right? The underground man is sort of paralyzed by thinking, right? Whereas Antoine is almost like paralyzed by, he almost like envisions himself some sort of like a passenger in the car of his life, as opposed to like the person behind the wheel. And for whatever reason, like I was able to relate to because it was almost like the underground man was clearly in the driver's seat, but he was too busy checking if his turn signals worked, and he was like, worried that the brakes would fail or something, and he was just kind of like thinking about all of those things, and like he was like constantly always getting ready to step on the gas, but he never did. But this guy Antoine, it seemed like he was just content to be in the passenger seat in many ways, and for whatever reason that made me almost like angry at him. I don't know, did you guys have like anything relating to that?
I wasn't quite angry at him. Let me just think.
It's not that I like disdain the character, but there were times where there seemed to be like a real opposition between myself and him. But
is that like
I definitely sympathized a lot with Antoine, to be honest. Like I don't know. I think you're more of a man of action in a lot of ways, but
an insult coming from Dostoevsky.
I thought that'd be a fun
across time and space insult. You
no, but like in a sense, it's true. Like you are always kind of like a go personality, and like I've definitely found myself in a lot of situations before. Like I don't know, like I think the perfect word is like dissociation. Like in the sense where it's like there's, almost like a divide between what's going on around you and like you as the viewer.
Yes.
So, and like I've definitely experienced that many times.
I totally agree.
I mean, he seems locked in it.
Yeah.
But I mean, there are a lot of scenes that I can relate to. So
I'm trying to think right now because I have felt that to various degrees from time to time. I'm trying to think about when I've often felt that. There's like,
what about like in a social setting you don't like?
I was just gonna say that. Okay. I was literally instantly, my mind was drawn to several experiences in college are striking me right now, where I was in that stage where I was like, I only had like because when you're drunk it doesn't really count because you're just that feeling is not really almost allowed to emerge when you're drunk. But like if you're like a beer in or something and you just don't want to be there have been times when I've been like at a bar or at a party or something where it literally seemed like I was a video game character. Like I was in a world that I was actually not in some deeper sense a part of. And I was almost like, it was almost like sort of just like, like the world was just this like slippery illusion that was just this like, it was almost like two-dimensional in a way.
Yeah, I think even video game character goes too far. I mean, like it's almost like you're watching like a TV show or like a movie in a sense, where it's just like, but it's not nearly as interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, it can be, but a lot of the time it's just like you're watching life happen. So,
have you had those moments where people like the dialogue almost seems scripted in like a very strange way? Yes.
Oh, 1,000,000%.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of when other times that I've felt the sense of dissociation. I mean, definitely at work. Like definitely at work when I feel like you can't escape and do something else. Like you can't really leave. And if you're there, you kind of have to do like the stuff that's there. But there's so little overlap between what I'm actually interested in and what I'm forced to do that there is this like I don't know, like when you're reading something that you love, there's no you and the thing. There's just the thing. But when you're doing something that you hate, sometimes there's like the you and then the task. You know?
Yeah. No, definitely. So I think, I don't know, I found this character pretty relatable. I don't think he's like sympathetic on all fronts, obviously. I mean, like
Sure.
his general like disdain for people. Like some of it I think is like unfair. Like some of it seems fair, some of it seems unfair, you know?
Yeah, some
Like,
of it he seems to just be cruel, which
yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
Underground Man was as well, but
Yeah. In slightly different ways.
different way. Yeah.
I mean, like some of like his crueler moments would be like definitely like his interactions with like the self-taught man.
Mm.
Like Giffin, you've read that section. That would be before Sunday, right?
I believe so, yeah.
So I mean, it's just like I kind of want to like dive into that a little bit. I mean, why do you think he has general disdain for the self-taught man? Because it goes beyond like, I mean, like he mentions at one point like the guy's very loquacious. He has sort of like, you know, bad breath that kind of stinks of both like tobacco and, you know, what else. But the point is that like,
Was it chocolate?
might have been chocolate.
Okay,
Yeah.
so I'm actually realizing I don't think the expression self-taught man came up in my translation, but I know who you're talking about. This is
What do they call him there?
So he meets this guy at the library, basically, just for the listeners, who he's kind of pieced together the fact that there's this man who has read this local library A to Z, and he's at L. And this man is planning to read through the entire like volume of A through Z of every book in the library. And interestingly, he plans to do that sort of before he goes on any adventures. You know, he talks at length about like the things he plans to do after he's amassed the knowledge that he believes is some sort of a prerequisite to the adventure.
Yeah, so he is referred to as the autodidact in mine.
Okay.
Which
I like the self-taught man more.
Oh, yeah, I mean, yeah, that one's clearly identifiable because I honestly thought autodidact might have just been like a kind of position in like French bureaucracy or something. You know? Like, it was unclear to me that's what it was referring to. It makes sense now, but obviously,
Okay.
but yeah, we can discuss him.
Yeah, there was a moment in here. Like obscure language in this book to not include autodidact. So yeah.
That would be needless.
Yeah, I was constantly Googling words just to be able to like, you know, read through this. Autodidact is one step too far. So.
I think it is. But yeah, so let's discuss him.
Well, to circle back to Adam's question, it's actually funny that you found this maybe the more inscrutable part of him. Unfortunately, this was one of the things that I related to a larger extent. Not necessarily about the self-taught man, because I could actually see myself, if this person existed in real life, being very interested to have a conversation with him, right? Because he seems like a very interesting guy. But I actually thought that the self-taught man, there was nothing intrinsic about him that made Antoine dislike him. And I'm struggling to think about, there were several kind of interactions or potential interactions he would have with people where he would think to himself, like, you know, please don't engage with me. Like, I just don't have. And I mean, you know, like I'll like show my cards here. Like that is something that I related to. And there's part of me that is okay with the fact that I experience obviously a lesser degree and less frequency of that. It's kind of like a competing virtues thing for me where, and like Adam, we were having a similar conversation about this recently, but like, I guess one thing that I struggle with, and it relates to this, like the question of Antoine is, okay, just to put it bluntly, a lot of people don't have anything like interesting to talk about. Like like honestly, a lot of people I'm just not interested in talking to, right? And I know that Adam maybe more so than Giffin perhaps shares that like feeling with me. And there's a part of me that is just like very covetous of my own time. Do you know what I mean? So if like someone's not interesting to talk to, or they don't have like interesting experiences, part of me is like very, very guarded against like, okay, I just kind of want to move on and do like better things. But obviously, I recognize the downsides of that too, like being closed off to people whom you otherwise would have an interesting conversation or even potentially like relationship of some sort with, right? And then there's also just sort of like the pragmatic virtues of like, just being like generous or like open or kind or whatever.
Friendly.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think though, like that doesn't like fully answer it for me though, right? Because it's like I think like your explanation works had the self-taught man had, if he had nothing interesting to talk about. He does have interesting things to discuss. But I think you kind of hit the nail on the head with part of your answer there, where it's like the lack of experience. Because it seems like this character, Antoine, really does value experience. And not even just experience itself, but he values in people if they value experience, right? Like that's one of the reasons that he loves Annie. Is that like her respect for like she recognizes like powerful moments. And I guess Giffin actually hasn't gotten to that part there, but
no, but I'll take your word for it.
Yeah, and this is kind of a guy devoid of experience who is attempting to learn everything from books. Yeah, so, and I mean, like, even Antoine questions, like, whether he's had, any true adventures in a sense.
I was going to read. I was, so on
that section was odd.
Yeah, I wanted to read a little bit of that, if I could.
That. Yeah.
Well, real quick, before we do that, because I know Adam and I have talked about this enough where I know that he very much knows what I'm talking about when I, say those sorts of things. Giffin, how much does that resonate with you?
That being
what I was talking about in my answer to Antoine's kind of like
time
standoffishness. Yeah.
Probably less. Well, I guess I relate to some degree. Yeah. Probably I experience it to a less degree than you do. But yeah, I do experience that.
So, okay, I found the section that I found very interesting about, because there's this whole, he calls experiences of a certain sort adventures. And the self-taught man, asks, he kind of like, he's asking him to see his postcards, he's asking him about his adventures. He even explicitly says, it's possibly a very indiscreet question, but have you had many adventures, monsieur? He's like,
and it's funny because like he leans in for that too, and like almost like in like a seductive sense that just repulses Antoine. Yeah. Yeah.
So Antoine answers yes, and then this is in his sort of just internal dialogue. He goes, even if it were true that I had never had any adventures, what difference would that make to me? First, it seems to be a pure question of words. This business at Meknes, for instance, I was thinking about a little while ago. A Moroccan jumped on me and wanted to stab me with an enormous knife, but I hit him just below the temple. Then he began shouting in Arabic, and a swarm of lousy beggars came up and chased us all the way to South Ataran. Well, you can call that by any name you like. In any case, it was an event which happened to me. It is completely dark, and I can't tell whether my pipe is lit. A trolley passes, red light on the ceiling, then a heavy truck which makes the house tremble. It must be 6 o'clock. I have never had adventures. Things happen to me, events, incidents, anything you like, but no adventures. It isn't a question of words, I am beginning to understand. There is something to which I clung more than all the rest, without completely realizing it. It wasn't love, heaven forbid, not glory, not money. It was, I had imagined that at certain times my life could take on a rare and precious quality. There was no need for extraordinary circumstances. All I asked for was a little precision. There is nothing brilliant about my life now, but from time to time, for example, when they play music in the cafes, I look back and tell myself, in old days, in London, Meknes, Tokyo, I have known great moments. I have had adventures. Now I am deprived of this. I have suddenly learned, without any apparent reason, that I have been lying to myself for 10 years. And naturally, everything they tell me in books can happen in real life, but not in the same way. It is to this way of happening that I clung so tightly. I don't know. I found that like very strange
It makes sense though, like in the context of like the pages we read though, because
Yeah.
like think about Giffin didn't read this part,
Please go on.
but I'll just go on. But so like on Sunday, right? Like he kind of observes people and kind of has this journey throughout the city that ends by the sea, right? And by the end of the night, in such a way that things have happened, he assumes something big or momentous will happen at the end of the night.
He assumes someone was like waiting for him, that something was
Yes.
waiting for him to like be the crescendo to.
Yes. So his point there is that, okay, events have happened, but there's no ultimate narrative to these events. Like he kind of mentions before that, you know, the passage that you read that, you know, there needs to be a certain sequence of events that one could call an adventure. And that there's like a real protagonist that has to go through like these events stepwise. And he's like, things have happened to me, but there wasn't necessarily like a build-up. There was no conclusion. You know, ultimately, these were just isolated events. So when he's talking about precision, he's like, let there be a narrative. Because throughout the book, he also talks about narrativizing his life and how important narrative is and that he's searching for that.
So in my translation, instead of precision, the word they use is order. Actually, I think might be, I kind of prefer that word in terms of like the conversation we're having. Order is what he's seeking, the kind of order that you get from like a written narrative that is structured in such a way as to be appealing, you know, if it's well written. It's almost like as if he's going around and waiting for the experience that one would have if reading the book, and you kind of see the beginnings. I think there's a passage shortly after about beginnings. It's like, there will be a moment where it can dawn upon you that there is a beginning.
Exactly. Because that happens throughout like the book where he'll recognize that, okay, a certain sequence of events has just happened, that I'm not now like almost like in a narrative path. And he's now waiting for that next event. And if it doesn't happen, he feels like this emptiness, like this sense of letdown. But it's like, you know, he'll have moments like Giffin was just saying that would lead one to think that he is almost living the life of a narrative, but ultimately he keeps getting let down in that sense.
Yeah.
So
do you guys think do you think that there's like an intrinsic negativity to a life that doesn't build on itself in that way? Because like on one hand, this guy seems like he's obviously had many what people would call adventures. Do you know what I mean?
Absolutely.
He even says, you know, on the next page, you know, the glitter of travel, the love of women, quarrels and trinkets. You know, he's like done things that anyone would very normally call adventures.
Yeah.
But it seems as though he is not satisfied because there's not this like literal progression to the stories. Like he almost needs it to be a very simplistic, you know how like in fifth grade or whatever we would learn those like
the pyramid and inverse pyramid.
Yeah.
No, that's 100% it. Like, because this, and then you're referring to like the next page after what we're talking about. It also talks about, I was talking about the beginnings, but it also talks about the endings. And he says like multiple times in multiple kind of scenarios that like things only achieve significance through death. I don't know if they use a different phrasing in your book, but it seems like he almost experienced a disappointment upon realizing that like there's just kind of like this middle area, but you know, it's like things will happen, even if things do happen, like you're just kind of left with the memory of it. Like there's no death there, like in the typical sense, like there's no grand conclusion. It's just kind of like you find yourself afterwards.
Because so the reason why I asked about that is because at first this struck me as like very self-pitying. I was like, okay, this guy's experienced like probably amazing things, and here he's just opining that they haven't culminated into this just magnificent apotheosis of like every, you know, like just like the meaning just like pours out of the universe, and he's asking for too much there. And at first I was very kind of annoyed with him, but then I actually reflected on a bit of like my own sort of nausea over the past 3 years has largely been because I know many of the things I've been doing over the past 3 years are extremely non-compounding. Like working in the engineering industry, for instance, is something that I hope is like non-compounding. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm.
And I was trying to project about this in the future. Like, okay, if like, okay, so I'm going to Houston for the master's program, right? If you tell me at the end of the day, that's actually where your like professional philosophy journey will end. You just won't get into a grad school and thereby you won't have a career in it. I'd be extremely like, I would be very unhappy with that, but I would still do it because the experience itself is very like something that I would want to have, right? Like doing an MA in philosophy. And that actually made me realize I very much share his idea that like looking like, think about this like 30 years from the future. And it's like, if that MA was kind of like the first step to a very, very rewarding career in like academic philosophy, it would actually have more meaning than if it was just this isolated chapter. So I
Sure.
changed my mind about that. Yeah.
Sure, and I think there's a lot of truth to what he's talking about in the sense that like just like the way adventures typically happen are nothing as they're not nearly as coherent as adventures portrayed in books.
Yeah.
They're not as
Yeah.
well thought out as that certain musical piece that he was listening to in the bar at the beginning of the book,
Yeah.
right? Where
That
it's
ragtime tune.
exactly where it's like he talks about kind of like those staccato jazz notes that almost be that are that almost kind of build up to something bigger. Then that also builds up to the vocalist who begins to just and everything is perfect about that musical piece to him. And even by the end, he doesn't feel empty because he almost feels like he's kind of ridden this arc where by the end, there's almost a completion to it. It was well thought out, well put together, and it was like satisfying for him to like, experience that.
Yeah, even in the death of it feels like that's the natural end. So he's feeling okay.
Yes, exactly.
I have an amazing quote that ties together what we were just talking about and then our discussion of memory too. He says, this is what I thought. For the most banal even to become an adventure, you must, and this is enough, begin to recount it. This is what fools people. A man is always a teller of tales. He lives surrounded by his stories and the stories of others. He sees everything that happens to him through them, and he tries to live his own life as if he were telling a story. But you have to choose, live or tell. I actually, that in hindsight, now discussing like that quote in the context of everything, I totally like that has like a whole new meaning for me there.
Yeah. No,
because I was going to bring this up earlier, really earlier, whenever we were talking about like to what extent we relate to Antoine. But this is the part that stuck out to me the most is whenever he kind of recognizes a certain arbitrariness. And I think this relates to the beginning and the ending and like his experiences and the idea of an adventure for him. But it's like the feeling of arbitrariness. I think that also can manifest whenever you're behaving as if you are trying to tell a story from it. Like, it's like, like you kind of lose. I think there's some disassociation, I guess I should say, attached to that, right? Like whenever you feel some arbitrariness, that I feel all the time. There's a moment earlier where he's talking about the self-taught man, and he is like imagining being him, and he's imagining him like getting to the end of the alphabet, right, the end of the library, and then kind of the self-taught man goes and thinks to himself, well, now what? And it's kind of like in that kind of moment, you kind of realize there's a certain arbitrariness to like everything that has been done. And I think that relates back to like the idea of the adventure, and the idea that you can't simultaneously live and narrate. Whatever your quotation used, the phrasing.
Yeah, live or tell.
Live or tell. Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think it might have a slightly different translation, but yeah, that part to me does ring true. In conclusion.
Yeah, and this doesn't exactly relate to what it actually doesn't relate at all, so I'm sorry. But it just kind of struck me because, so Antoine's a little more active than I was giving him credit for. because he is very passive, obviously, but at the same time, like he does place himself in situations constantly in order for a narrative to begin. In the sense that, think about placing himself in that on that dark street where, you know, he's hoping for something to begin that narrative, or when he, you know, walks with the masses.
Oh, the dark street. That's a great one.
Yeah, or where he, you know, is constantly finding himself like in these bars or, you know, by the sea. He's not like a recluse, right? He's constantly putting himself in positions in order for this narrative to unfold.
And it's like a lot of that is internalized, like because we see inside of him, like it's a lot of like kind of self-loathing, but he does do things, right? It's just that he kind of hates the fact that he's doing it sometimes. He seeks beginnings and then they just never materialize. You mentioned like when he's in the dark alley, and then that's like where the one woman I wasn't sure, like Lucy.
Yes.
She's like, there's some sort of interaction between Lucy and like some guy, and the guy like end up walking away and she's like bawling. And like there's this like page and a half where like Antoine is kind of like aware that something should happen, that he should be there, and like, you know, in case not impose himself, but like be there in case she needs something. But like it all like, so this is like almost a textbook beginning of a story, right? Like, or of an arc at least, right? Like a girl like, that he knows is like, you know, just, you know, I don't know what the exact social situation was, but like she's like bawling in front of him just by coincidence.
She's some sort of maid at his apartment, right?
Yeah, some work. Yeah. I don't know exactly what her role was, but like basically at the very end of like this passage of like kind of like internal thoughts, he simply says he walks away. And even before that as well, like his conversation, at least in my version, it talks about like the idea of suffering, like what is the purpose of suffering, and like the way he kind of addresses the situation I found very bizarre. Like he kind of at first, you know, he recognized like maybe I should be over there and maybe not like, you know, comfort her, but like give her the option to be comforted, you know, if she needs it. But then by the end, he goes, he's like kind of just like starts internalize, like just thinking to himself about like what the situation amounts to. And he's like, no, it isn't from herself that she is drawing the strength to suffer so much. It is coming to her from outside, from this boulevard. And he kind of just starts thinking about like, it seems very unnatural the way like he's kind of addressing this situation, right? Like he's almost just determining like the origins of these things instead of like living. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and that shows like his emphasis once again on setting. I mean, just the idea of that, you know, passivity in that sense, where it's like, okay, ultimately like the scene will dictate behavior and will dictate narrative, right? Like scenes dictate narrative rather than behavior.
He wants this to be like a thing that can be clearly, I mean, not only seen but foreseen almost, right? Like I don't know, the scene with like, in the darkness, that was like a very bizarre scene to me. I was just curious your thoughts on that.
I wasn't sure what to make of it until like later in the book. I kind of thought back and I'm like, I didn't reread it, so it would be interesting to reread that scene.
I did reread it. It was so bizarre to me because like basically it ends with, I turn my back to her. After all, she is lucky. I, for my part, have been much too calm these last 3 years. I can receive nothing more from these tragic solitudes except a little empty purity. I walk away. Like that is like, I think you can parse out like that kind of paragraph and like endlessly in terms of like what it represents for his psychology. And
he's definitely jealous of the fact that she's going through some sort of narrative there. I mean, if he's jealous of the suffering there, I mean, he wants something. You know, he wants there to be some arc to his daily routine. I mean, it's clear he lives like a listless life.
Yeah,
I mean, Giffin, you saw, actually, you wouldn't know this because the end of Sunday, but he's like, I mean, most people, like, it's their day off, right? It's like their one day off every week.
Yeah.
And there's some regularity to that for like the general population. Like he says, it's their day, not mine. You know, so because Monday
he has no order
into
here.
Tuesday and Sunday bleeds into Monday.
Yeah.
So, and it's, Like there's like a general listlessness to his life as well that he envies in others.
Even suffering seems like a benefit.
Yeah.
This guy this guy almost seems like, I don't know, we'll probably learn more about his past in the second part of the book, but this almost seems like a guy who kind of took a risk and got burned, and he's never been able to recover from that, and he lives his life in a very risk averse way. I don't know, he strikes me as someone who he almost strikes me as someone who took a chance on something one time, and it just sort of weakened him for it,
Yeah, he was resolved to never let that happen again, despite the merit that could have been earned. Right?
It's hard to know though, right? Because I just, when you were talking about that, I recall the beginning of the story. Please remind me of details because I'm sure I'm gonna get them wrong. But I mean, he's offered, after 5 years abroad of exploration, he's offered to take another trip, but then something just changes in his mind. He suddenly gains this sense of autonomy where he just says no. And it's he didn't say no because he didn't want to go, but it was almost like he recognized that he had been operating in autopilot for 5 years. And it was the power to say no, he seized upon that. So it's I just can't tell if he tries to seize upon these moments of seeming autonomy that he has, and generally he operates on this autopilot. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it's not even specific to him. Maybe I'm just thinking about it through just my own lens of I could see someone who obviously just went through something traumatic or whatever, and it just makes them permanently recoil in a really unhealthy way.
Yeah, no, I think that's an accurate way to try to bring to our experiences this guy's kind of attitude.
Yeah.
No, because it's I don't know why I was thinking about that, but the reason why I thought it was germane to this is he just shows that if you're in that sort of a situation, the over recoiling or the permanent recoiling is a very isolating experience. It's not a happy one, to overcorrect in that direction.
Yeah. I can agree with that.
Yeah. Because it also struck me that this guy clearly has loneliness issues also. He doesn't have healthy relationships in this way that he's always sort of you get the sense that he never allows himself to be vulnerable in front of anyone.
No.
You get, I don't know, you get this sense that he's very sort of, standoffish, very viewing people as, he actually says this at some point, he's almost elevated objects to the point of people. He talks about that. He says most people view objects as sort of things to be, interacted with, but he sees them on even a higher plane than that. And it's really strange that he's almost instead of degrading people, he's elevated objects. It's very strange.
And he definitely degrades people, though. I mean, without a doubt.
Sure,
he's definitely very misanthropic. I mean, think of there's so many scenes you could draw upon, but one that just came to mind for me was recall when he's sitting in the bar. This is his first bar scene in the beginning of the book, when he requests that one song be played, and whoever the bartender was, or not even the bartender, because that was the blind guy. It was
the waitress.
It was the waitress. Yeah, she said, "Well, let me check with the other table," and those were the guys who were playing cards.
Yeah.
And remember, he describes the one guy playing cards with just with a hideous mouth, with crooked, decaying teeth, giving him a wicked grin as he just drops cards down with a gnarled hand. And it's just the way he viewed probably some seemingly regular guy as just almost like a demon. You know what I mean? Like, but that's like every character that he begins to describe. You know, it's they're never described like positively.
Yeah,
But in
that's
some
very
cases,
true.
actually, but mostly very, very negative.
Yeah, 90% of the time it's just kind of like him just allowing himself to be disgusted by everything he's observing, and he continues observing.
Did you guys find it dizzying or disorienting, like the level to which things were described? I found that very. It was almost sort of tiring to the point where I became disoriented in the text almost.
See,
No, I'm just saying, like in general, throughout, there were so many things. He would just like, this is just a dumb example, but he remarked, he was kind of walking the streets and he saw this family leaving the house, and he, witnessed like the man lock the door, and he even pondered to himself how the house would remain unlit until they returned. And it's just like he's like, there's just so many things that he's thinking about and like focusing on. It was just like he was like just hyper like chattery to himself almost.
Yeah. No, I probably avoided some of like the discomfort of reading like so much descriptive work because I've read it like in small bursts most of the time. But like today I was reading, a little bit more. And there was a point where I was kind of like in the middle of a paragraph and like was looking back at the paragraph I had just read in four. And I was like, he's literally just describing like his son, like everything possibly to be seen on a Sunday.
Yeah.
I don't know though, because I think maybe it would be better read like in shorter chunks thing, because like I think like I don't know, I definitely it got across to me like his mindset, but not like not like a grating way, you know what I mean? Because the thing is, like, for me, it was clear that he was trying to capture moments, like a big theme is like the impermeability, or that's the wrong word.
Impermanence.
Yes. The impermanence of just like time itself, or moments themselves, is like one moment is always just kind of like transforming into another moment there.
And then the necessary like, death.
It's in a sense like he's doing this for himself, but he's capturing like individual moments where it's like you can almost, I mean, like if you sit with it for a while and just like visualize the scene that he's putting together. I mean, it must have been brutal for you because like the pace you were reading this morning was brutal. I saw you're like, okay, I'm like 40 pages in, and like an hour later, like I'm 70 pages in. I'm like, if you're reading like 30 pages like an hour or like every hour and a half, like it's like a machine reading this.
Yeah,
so like
I wasn't disgusted by the descriptive, but I did notice it.
Well, I said disoriented, not disgusted. There's a fair difference there.
You did say disoriented. My apologies.
There was revulsion within me.
So maybe it's interesting that we had different reading experiences, because that actually made me think of perhaps substance assisted moments of hyper sort of awareness or like hyper perspicacity to the point where it is actually dizzying. And if you've had those moments, whether on Earl Grey tea or not, I
managed to avoid those, I think, on my Earl Grey.
I like, like sober moments too, where it's like, there's just like this very focus in the wrong context can become extremely uncomfortable to the point where it's like almost like jolting. I don't know. Like, have you? I've definitely had those experiences.
No, definitely.
Okay. Because this just made me think of those times where you almost like just can't turn it off.
I think like this is like his like way of living too. In a sense, like it's it's almost like when he's talking or communicating with someone, he's telling at that point. He's like either living or telling. And living for him is just like observing the world and just taking in as much as possible on everything that he's witnessing.
Yeah. I mean, to the point where at moments, I'm sorry, I was going to mention, because like there are moments where he kind of just like, because he's so hyper observant and that there are some like patterns, he will just like observe the fact that he can correctly observe what is going to happen. Like that is like the degree to which it happens. Like he's like out looking out his window and observing some old woman. He's like, this is exactly what is going to happen. And then he kind of observed the fact that he knows what is going to happen. Yeah. And it's just like, I think he actually has just been for like 5 or whatever years, just been in a state that cannot be turned off of hyper focus. I mean, that's exhausting. Like, you know, the less hyperbolic version would just be kind of like you're caffeinated and kind of exhausted when you're finished with what you're doing, but the caffeine is still kind of in you, so you're still kind of like you can't just wind down and go to sleep. You're wired. That would be like the example. But this guy kind of has like some long-term case of this where every moment is just constant analysis, and just like the exhaustion is just still there lingering with him.
He definitely doesn't like when anyone communicates with him because he has to narrow his focus at that point.
Yeah.
Like it's like he's able to, you know, in the parade of people downtown, he's able to kind of like witness all these scenes in a sense, versus individuals in the crowd are like holding like these individual conversations where they're not witnessing the larger spectacle. And I think he does take a certain pride in that as well, and definitely elevates himself above others because of that. I mean, the way he describes others is like, you know, they experience life like in this narrow sense where, you know, they're just not seeing the bigger picture of what he's seeing in a lot of senses. So
like it kind of makes me think, this goes back to your man of action comments, but like how like whenever if I don't do things often enough, I do kind of get a little unhinged. Like I need to, if I spend too much time just like merely thinking and not doing, I kind of do get a little bit crazy. Like I'm just curious, like what you guys think about your own like balances, but I know if I like live too much in my head, I kind of go a little bit crazy. Like I have to be a body as well as a mind, you know?
Yeah, I definitely get that. But I think I have like a higher tolerance for you than like doing nothing. You know what I mean? Like to the point of like just existing.
Yeah.
Rather than like, you know, constantly doing stuff. Like I can, you know, just exist for a longer period of time before I get like that anxious feeling of like, gotta get something done. So yeah.
I think my tolerance is extraordinarily low. Even if like what I'm doing isn't particularly productive, I'll just sit there and just like try to find something to do. Even if it's something like really minute, like I'm just like aggravated that I'm not finding a YouTube video that strikes my fancy or something like that. But I can't just like sit and just kind of exist like you're describing.
So you'll never just sit on the couch and just kind of like quite literally just like stare forward and just like think about things?
No, I have a very low tolerance for that. I mean, like there are like low moments but like there are times when I'm like contemplating things, but literally not just sit there and like kind of stare at the wall.
I have definitely done that like many a time. Just
I mean, I know I've done it. It's not
even like all like wrapped up in contemplation. It's more so like kind of goes back to like the memories thing, because like I'll dip into memories all the time.
I won't. Those are all locked.
The door has been barred.
I have to be generous to myself to allow myself the key.
That's a DLC content.
That'll be $40 to unlock your own past experiences.
I have like punctate and frequent but short experiences of that, and that probably stems from I've like fallen out of it recently, but like I will have months where I'll be like daily meditating, and when I do that, I do very much have like my day will be punctuated and like perforated with moments of, you know, anywhere from 5 to 60 seconds of that just like raw contemplation or like raw experiencing. And funnily enough, that actually, like, I don't know. For me, it's actually weird where when things are in balance, that tends to happen more. I'm having a really hard time like phrasing this. Like, I know what I mean experientially. It's like whenever I kind of feel like my motor is tuned correctly, like I'm living And like the more I feel like my second order desires are being expressed, you know what I mean, like, and not my first order ones, then like those moments almost seem to like crop up more, because it's just like, I don't know, it almost feels like there's clarity to be had, but when things are misfiring, it seems like that's even out of reach. I don't know how else to describe it.
I'm definitely the opposite. Like when things are worse, I'm like less of like I'm like even less productive or like fulfilling
Mindful.
or mindful than I should be. I'm like I'll just like dip into memories if like things aren't going as well.
Really?
Right? Yeah.
Huh.
So like that's probably like a coping mechanism of mine where it's like, you know, I'm like less present. So maybe even it is even like, you know, of just like being present that I'm describing. It's more of just like dipping into memories. So maybe it's a
Yeah.
little bit different. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems like it
Yeah.
might be.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. I've because there's like a different type of thing that, like, whenever I've had some like bad experiences where it's like kind of overwhelmingly bad, I'll probably seem to engage in that sort of like contemplative behavior, but it's actually the opposite in like a horrid way, because it's just like,
Paralysis.
yeah, but it's like paralysis without content almost. Like, it's horrible. Like, I don't think until recently I experienced like nausea of a certain form, where he almost paints it as being like contentless. Like, you can't even have like anxiety about something. It's just like general anxiety.
Yeah.
And I think for like the vast majority of my life, I've been extremely blind to that. Like, that's not really a thing for me. Like, I've been anxious about things all the time, but never like that kind of nausea feeling that he was describing.
Yeah,
It's
I
just
think
like
I'm the same way, because likewise, when I mentioned I don't know to what extent I, you know, well, not necessarily sympathize, but could project myself onto like that feeling of nausea in particular that he feels, Antoine. Like, I don't know that I feel. Like, I'm not 100% sure
So
if
do
I
you think
felt it
you've
at all.
ever?
Well, this will depend very highly on how we kind of characterize it, but like, parts of it, it seems like certain attributes of it, yes.
Mm,
But exactly what you were describing, like, it's hard to say exactly.
mm,
You know, I mean, there are certainly moments where I was feeling anxiety and couldn't pinpoint the origin of it. But that, especially if you were younger, that just because you are less articulate.
mm.
But most of the time when I'm feeling kind of anxious, or, well, this is the example you gave, but like, I can usually, it's probably very presently obvious what the origin is.
Hmm.
So contentless anxiety is kind of like what you're asking about.
it's like
Yeah.
it's like your mind's been just like frozen in a
Yeah.
sense.
I honestly don't. It's hard for me to say. It's hard for me to say that I never experienced it, but I think for a very long time in my life, I had maybe never experienced it.
Yeah, I honestly, I'll have to reflect on it.
Hmm.
It's a rare occurrence for me. Because I am curious if I have, in the same way you describe it.
Yeah. It's honestly like I find it extremely disturbing. Like, it's a very, very uncomfortable. Like, I could honestly imagine that it would be less uncomfortable for some people, but for whatever reason, like, I don't know. Yeah, like I said, I don't know. Uh, I don't know. It's interesting. It's almost like, I don't think I was ever the type of person where you're almost like, sort of like the background setting on your TV or whatever. Do you know what I mean? Like, if like the current channel is,
Static.
yeah, it's like, what level? Okay, like, so there's kind of something playing, and like, okay, you turn that thing off, but the TV's not off. okay, what's on the screen then? Do you know what I mean? Like that channel has been turned off, but the TV is still on. And my like default setting, like my idol was not really, and like still usually isn't, but like I now know what he's talking about. That like very uncomfortable idol situation.
Yeah, I definitely know what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
I've certainly experienced that. So
It's horrible, actually. It's like
no,
very,
it's
horrible.
It's terrible.
Yeah. Um,
There, it's almost like just like the raw feeling, and like that's
yeah.
it. Like
Yes.
it's like
Yes.
yeah, with like very little else. So,
Yes. Yes. Which like
yeah,
the rawness of it is part of the very perturbing part.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I
Are
don't
we
know.
missing any scenes?
I was gonna say, do we really need to talk about?
I feel like we could finish off the narrative once, like, the whole narrative is finished.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, so just for listeners, so I guess we're wrapping up at this point, and we probably went long enough to the point where I'll make this a part one. It might depend on how long part two itself is also. But we're getting to the point where Adam and I have just read about it. Giffin is about to read about it, but he is contacted by Annie, who seems to be sort of an old and perhaps only love of his. So we'll pick up there next time. Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of Plato's Cave. I always enjoy discussing topics with these two guys. So if you want to support the show in any way, you can do so simply by sharing it. I'm hoping to get this show out to more people. And so if you want to share it on Twitter or social media, that would really help me. You can also rate it on Apple Podcasts, like this video if you're watching on YouTube, or subscribe via Apple Podcasts or an RSS feed. You can also discuss it on your own show and link back to my website, or you can connect me with recommended guests or topics to cover. You can get in contact with me at Plato's Cave Podcast at gmail.com. Follow me on Twitter at Jordan_C_Myers, and I now have a website for my philosophy endeavors at jordanmyers.org. If you want to know a little bit more about me and my fellow co-hosts, as I said in the introduction, I'm a master's student in philosophy at the University of Houston. I did my undergrad at the University of Pittsburgh, where I studied mechanical engineering and philosophy, and now that I'm back at school, I'm hoping to more closely study moral responsibility, free will, ethics, epistemology, and moral psychology. Those are topics that I was introduced to and got really interested in my undergrad work. So Adam and Giffin accompanied me on this show, and Adam is one of my oldest friends. We actually met in kindergarten, and we've been interested in philosophical topics for as long as we can remember, and in a lot of ways it's been the basis of our friendship. Adam studied chemistry and biology at Cornell, and he is currently working at a law firm. And he's especially interested in moral responsibility as well, but also law, religion, and free will. Giffin is also one of my oldest friends, and we've been friends since elementary school as well. Giffin studied biology and economics at RPI, and now he works in human health research. He believes that there's very interesting overlap between both of his fields of study and philosophy, and he's particularly interested in exploring political philosophy. So this series was right up his alley. And with all of that information, again, I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and I hope that you get in contact with me or follow my work in any way that you deem reasonable to do. So with that, thank you for listening.